It was the summer of 2014 when I decided to go camping alone for the first time. I was 27 back then, living in Oregon, and working a job that kept me stuck indoors most of the week. My head was constantly filled with noise, deadlines, traffic, people. So I figured a weekend alone in the woods might help me clear my thoughts. I picked a quiet spot along a small creek near the base of Mount Jefferson. I'd been there before with friends, but this time I wanted to experience the quiet, the stillness, the kind of silence you can't get anywhere near town. I packed light, just a small tent, sleeping bag, some canned food, a flashlight, a folding knife, and a small propane stove. I had enough to get by comfortably for 2 nights. I parked my old Tacoma near the trailhead around noon, then hiked about 2 miles down to where the creek curved sharply between a line of cedar trees. The ground was flat, soft with pine needles, and open enough that I could see in every direction. It felt safe, familiar, and perfect for what I needed. By the time I set up my tent, it was mid-afternoon. The air smelled of damp wood and moss, and the sound of running water from the creek was steady and calm. I cooked some beans and sausage, ate in silence, and just listened to the forest. There were no people, no cell service, no noise except wind and the occasional bird. It was peaceful in a way that made me feel small, like the world didn't even know I was there, and that was strangely comforting. As the sun began to set, the woods changed. Everything that was bright and open in the day started to feel different, darker, heavier. The trees cast long shadows across the creek, and the chirping of crickets grew louder. I gathered a few dry branches and lit a small fire before it got too dark. I remember sitting there for a long time, just staring at the flames and trying not to think too much. At some point, maybe around 9 or 10, I heard something move across the creek. It wasn't loud, just the faint crunch of leaves or maybe a stick snapping. I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. It wasn't uncommon, and I tried not to worry. I glanced across the water, but the other side was too dark to see clearly. The firelight only reached a few feet, and beyond that, it was just black. I listened carefully for a few seconds, but the sound stopped, and I went back to poking at the fire. About 10 minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer. It was a heavier step, slower, like someone trying not to make noise. The hairs on my arms stood up. I turned off my flashlight to see if my eyes could adjust to the dark, but all I could make out were faint shapes between the trees. The sound stopped again. I tried to convince myself it was just a deer or maybe the wind knocking something over. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was watching me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound made me tense up. The wind brushed against the tent, branches cracked somewhere off in the distance, and the creek's steady noise almost started to feel like it was hiding other sounds beneath it. Around 3 a.m., I finally drifted off for a bit, but I woke up suddenly when I heard what sounded like slow footsteps circling the tent. Not running, not hurried, just slow, deliberate steps, one after another. I didn't move or make a sound. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I gripped my folding knife tightly in my sleeping bag and waited. The steps went on for maybe a minute, then stopped completely. I lay there for hours, not daring to move, until the faint gray light of morning started to show through the fabric of the tent. When I got out, the ground around the tent was damp from dew. I walked around slowly, checking for prints or anything that might explain the noise. I found something. Faint marks in the dirt that looked like footprints. Human ones. Not boots, but bare feet. The prints were thin, long, and led from the trees near the creek to the back of my tent, then away again. I felt a deep chill crawl down my back when I saw them. I told myself it was probably some hiker passing through late at night, maybe someone who got lost. Still, it didn't make sense. Who hikes barefoot in the dark out there? I wanted to believe there was a logical reason, but the longer I stood there staring at those prints, the more uneasy I felt. I decided to pack up and move my camp a little farther up the creek. By noon, I found another spot about a quarter-mile upstream. I felt better being in a new place, even though it wasn't that far away. The new spot was tighter between trees and didn't have as much open space, but it made me feel more concealed. I spent most of the day fishing and trying not to think about the night before. For a while, it worked. The quiet, the sound of the water, the smell of pine, it all settled me. When the sun started going down again, I made a small fire and cooked another simple meal. The day had been warm, but as night came, the temperature dropped fast. I threw on a jacket and sat close to the fire. I couldn't shake the thought of those prints, though. The idea that someone might have been walking barefoot around my tent while I slept wouldn't leave my mind. Around 10 p.m., I put out the fire and climbed into my tent. I zipped it up tight and kept the knife near my hand again. The woods were completely silent. Even the creek sounded softer than before, like it was holding its breath. I lay there staring at the thin outline of the tent roof, listening. For a long time, nothing happened. Then I heard it, the same slow steps, faint but clear. This time, they weren't on the other side of the creek. They were right outside my tent. I froze completely. My breathing got shallow, and I could feel my pulse pounding against the ground. The steps stopped right behind my head, no more than a foot away from the thin nylon wall. I could hear the soft sound of someone's weight shifting on the damp ground. They didn't move for what felt like forever. Then I heard something else, the faint sound of breathing. Slow, heavy, uneven. Whoever it was, they were standing there, listening. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. After maybe 30 seconds, the breathing faded, followed by the slow sound of steps moving away. I waited another 5 minutes before unzipping the tent just enough to look out. Nothing. Only trees, shadows, and the faint outline of the creek. I didn't sleep again that night. As soon as the first light hit, I started packing up. I was done. I wanted out of those woods as fast as possible. When I stepped out to roll up my tent, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. A footprint again, right behind where my head had been. Same long shape, same bare foot. But this time it was deeper, like the person had been standing there for a long while. I didn't stop to think anymore. I packed everything in a rush, slung my bag over my shoulder, and headed straight back to the truck. The whole hike back, I kept looking over my shoulder. I didn't see anyone, but I kept hearing faint sounds. A branch cracking, the faint rustle of something moving in the woods behind me. When I finally reached the truck and slammed the door shut, I sat there for a while just breathing. The air inside smelled like dust and old coffee, but it felt safe. I started the engine and didn't look back once as I drove down that dirt road. When I got home, I cleaned my gear and put everything away. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. It didn't feel like something people would believe anyway. But a few days later, I got curious. I looked up the area online, reading about any reports or missing people. I found an old article from 2006 about a man who had been living off the grid near Mount Jefferson for years, sometimes seen wandering barefoot along the creeks, breaking into camps for food. They called him the Creek Man. Locals said he was never caught, just vanished one winter. I don't know if it was him, or someone else, or maybe just my own mind playing tricks in the dark. But every time I think back to that night, I remember how close those steps were to my head, how long that footprint was, how long it stayed pressed into the mud, right where I had been sleeping. I haven't gone camping alone since. I was 23 when it happened. It was the summer of 2018, and I had just finished my last semester of college. A friend of mine had suggested I take a break before starting work, and I figured a solo camping trip would clear my head. I'd always liked being outdoors, and I wanted to get away from everything for a few days. No phone signal, no noise, no people. I picked a spot in northern New Mexico, near a small town called Dulce. It was surrounded by forest and hills, but also close to stretches of open desert. I'd never been there before, but I read online that it was quiet and remote. Not a tourist place, not crowded. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed my old Ford Escape with camping gear. Tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, water jugs, canned food, flashlight, batteries, knife, lighter, and a small cooler with a few things that needed to stay cold. I left early one morning and reached the area around noon. The drive itself was beautiful. Empty highways, long dusty roads, and no billboards for miles. I stopped once at a gas station to fill up and grab some jerky and coffee. By the time I got to the camping area, the sun was strong, and the air smelled like dry grass and pine. I parked off a dirt road and walked about half a mile into a small clearing surrounded by trees. There was no one else around, no tents, no campfires, nothing. Just me, the wind, and the sound of some bird calls echoing through the trees. I set up my tent, got the fire pit ready, and spent the afternoon exploring the area. The landscape was rough and wide, with big rocks scattered around and dry branches snapping under my boots. I saw a few animal tracks near a dried creek bed, maybe deer or coyotes. I wasn't worried. I'd camped enough times to know what to expect. That evening, I made a small fire and heated up some canned beans and sausage. The light started to fade, and the sky turned a deep orange before going completely black. It was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring a little. I remember lying back on the ground, staring up at the stars. You don't realize how many there are until you're somewhere with no city lights. Sometime around 10 p.m., I started hearing movement. It was faint at first, like something stepping on twigs. I thought maybe it was a deer or a rabbit. The sound stopped, then started again, closer. It wasn't fast or heavy, just slow, steady steps. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the noise, but there was nothing, just trees and darkness. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just wildlife, but it kept going, moving around my camp in a circle, staying just out of sight. Every time I turned, the sound shifted to the opposite side. Felt like something was pacing. I turned off my fire, crawled into my tent, and zipped it up. I laid there listening. The air felt heavier, like something was watching me through the fabric. After maybe an hour, I heard breathing. Not loud, but close. Too close. Slow, heavy breaths, right outside the tent wall near my head. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then I heard a sound that didn't make sense. It was like someone trying to copy the sound of a human breathing, but not doing it right. Almost like it was forcing itself to breathe through a throat that wasn't meant to. I stayed still for what felt like forever. Eventually, the breathing stopped. I waited another 20 minutes before daring to unzip the tent and peek out. The fire was out, the night was pitch black, and the air was cold. I didn't see anything, but I smelled something foul, like wet dirt and blood. I didn't sleep that night. When the first light of morning came, I got out and looked around. I found tracks about 20 feet away. They looked human, but not exactly. The toes were longer, the shape slightly off, and they were deep like something heavy had been pressing into the dirt. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. I packed my gear fast and decided to move further out, closer to the edge of the forest, near some low hills. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a bear or coyote that got too close. The next day went by quietly. I hiked, took photos, and tried to enjoy myself. By evening, I set up camp again. This time, I built a bigger fire and kept it going bright. The warmth helped me feel safer, but I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. When night fell, I noticed something strange. The woods went completely silent again. No crickets, no wind, nothing. It was like the air was holding its breath. I tried to ignore it and focused on the fire, but after a while, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, circling, deliberate. This time, I shone my flashlight and caught something in the distance. First, I thought it was a person. It was standing behind a tree, tall and still. The beam of the light hit its shoulder, and the skin looked wrong, pale and stretched like it didn't fit properly. I blinked, and it moved quick to the left, disappearing behind another tree. I waited, heart racing. It peeked again, just its head showing, and I realized it was watching me. I don't know how long I stood there. It didn't come closer, but it didn't leave either. Just standing, watching, sometimes crouching, sometimes moving behind the trees. I couldn't see its face clearly, but its movements were strange, twitchy, uneven, like it was learning how to move. Around midnight, the fire started dying down. I didn't dare sleep. I kept feeding it wood, trying to keep the light bright. At some point, I looked up and it was gone. I didn't hear it leave, didn't see it go, just gone. When morning came, I found something near my tent. It was my backpack, dragged several feet away and half open. The zipper was torn, and some of my food was gone. But what really scared me was the footprint next to it. It was clearer this time. Human-shaped, but longer, toes spread wide apart, deep into the dirt like something had been crouching there. I packed up again, faster this time. I decided to leave. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just threw everything into the car and started driving. The dirt road out was rough and I had to go slow. About 15 minutes in, I saw something in the distance, standing by the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a man, tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing torn clothes. But as I got closer, I realized it was the same thing from last night. It was standing perfectly still, head tilted, watching my car approach. I didn't stop. I drove right past it. As I did, it turned its head to follow me, slowly, like its neck didn't move right. I didn't look back. When I reached the main road, I pulled over and got out to catch my breath. My hands were shaking. I looked in the rearview mirror, nothing behind me, just empty road and open land. I stayed there for a while, trying to make sense of what I saw. I didn't tell anyone for a long time, not because I thought no one would believe me, but because I didn't even know how to explain it. It wasn't a ghost, wasn't a story you tell to scare people. It was something real. Something that looked almost human but wasn't. A few months later, out of curiosity, I searched online about the area near Dulce. I found posts from locals talking about strange sightings, things that mimic voices, things that walk on 2 legs but don't look right. They called them skinwalkers. I didn't want to believe it, but every description matched what I saw. It's been 7 years now. I haven't gone camping since. Sometimes when I drive through remote areas, I catch myself checking the tree line, half expecting to see something standing there, watching. I tell myself it was just a trick of the light or some animal that looked wrong in the dark. But deep down, I know what I saw wasn't a mistake. It was real, and whatever it was, it knew exactly what I was, and it wanted me to know it was there. I had been driving for almost 10 hours straight before pulling off onto a side road somewhere in northern Arkansas. It was early October 2011, the kind of time of year when the days still feel warm but the nights drop into a sharp, quiet cold. I had planned to camp for a night on my way down to visit my brother in Louisiana. I wasn't much of a camper, but I had a tent, a sleeping bag, and a cheap flashlight from Walmart. I figured I'd just find a quiet spot, sleep, and be back on the road by morning. The spot I found was just past a wooden bridge off Highway 72. There was a dirt trail that led down to a small clearing beside a creek. It was half hidden by trees, no signs or fences, and the ground was flat enough to pitch my tent. The air smelled faintly like pine and mud. The sound of water running over the rocks was steady and low, enough to feel peaceful but not too loud. I parked my car near the edge of the clearing and got out. The sun was setting behind the trees, turning everything into a slow orange fade. The air felt cooler already. I unpacked my tent, hammered the stakes into the dirt, and set up a small fire using the few dry sticks I could find. The smell of smoke rose through the damp air. I sat there eating a sandwich from a gas station bag, listening to the creek. There was no phone signal. My car clock said 7:23 p.m. Darkness came down faster than I expected, and by 8, it was pitch black except for my fire and the weak beam of my flashlight. The woods looked like a wall of shadows, and every sound felt louder: crickets, small cracks of twigs, the wind brushing through dry leaves. I remember thinking how strange it felt to be completely alone out there. I could see my breath when I exhaled. My fire started to die down, so I stood up to gather more wood. That's when I noticed something. Across the creek, maybe 40 feet away, there was a single light. It looked like a flashlight, faint and steady, moving slowly between the trees. At first, I figured it was another camper, but the more I looked, the stranger it seemed. It didn't swing around like someone walking with it. It just stayed low to the ground, moving slowly in one direction, then stopping. I stood there holding my own flashlight, watching. After about a minute, it went out completely. I tried to shake off the unease. Maybe it was a reflection, or someone packing up, or just my eyes adjusting to the dark. I threw another log on the fire and sat down again. A while later, I started hearing movement, soft steps in the leaves. Not heavy like an animal, quieter, more careful. It came from behind my tent, up near the tree-line. My skin prickled, and I froze. The sound stopped when I turned my flashlight toward it. Nothing, just trees and the thin white beam of my light. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or something small. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was closer than that. I stayed awake longer than I planned, sitting by the fire, listening. The wind picked up around 10 p.m., and the temperature dropped. I eventually crawled into my sleeping bag inside the tent. The nylon walls creaked in the breeze, and the faint smell of smoke clung to my jacket. I zipped the tent up tight and turned off the flashlight. It took me a while to fall asleep. The creek kept up its soft gurgling sound. At some point in the night, I woke up again, not because of noise, but because it was dead silent. No wind, no crickets, nothing, just complete stillness. I opened my eyes and waited. Then came the sound of something brushing against the outside of my tent. A slow drag like fingers across the fabric. My body locked up. The sound moved along the side, near my feet, then stopped. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in the silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After maybe 15 seconds, it started again. A faint scrape and a soft shuffle of footsteps moving away. I reached for my flashlight, my hand shaking, and turned it on. The thin light filled the tent. I listened, but everything outside was still. I waited what felt like forever before unzipping the tent just enough to peek out. The fire was almost gone, just orange embers in the ash. The woods were dark, completely still, but there were footprints in the dirt, not animal tracks, human ones. They came from the trees, circled near my tent, and went off toward the creek. My mouth went dry. I scanned the area with the flashlight, but the beam only reached so far. I could see the glint of the creek water and the outlines of branches. Nothing else. I decided right then I wasn't staying until morning. I shoved everything into my car as fast as I could. Tent, sleeping bag, whatever I could grab. My hands were shaking the whole time. The woods stayed quiet, like everything was holding its breath. When I started the engine, the headlights lit up the trees in front of me. That's when I saw it, on the opposite side of the creek, standing halfway behind a tree. A man, tall, wearing a jacket or hoodie, I couldn't tell. His face was half hidden in the dark. He didn't move, just stood there watching the light hit him. I stared for maybe 3 seconds before I hit the gas and drove back up the dirt trail. My tires threw mud everywhere as I got back onto the main road. I didn't stop until I reached a small gas station 20 miles away. Inside the bathroom, I sat on the edge of the sink trying to calm down. My whole body was shaking. I kept replaying it over in my head. The dragging sound, the footprints, that figure standing there like he'd been waiting for me to notice him. I stayed at a cheap roadside motel that night. Couldn't sleep much. Every sound in that room made me jump. The next morning, I drove back toward the area, thinking maybe I should at least see if anything was left behind. Maybe check in daylight. When I got there, the clearing looked almost normal again. My tent poles were still lying in the dirt where I dropped them. The fire pit was cold. But near the creek, I saw something that made my stomach drop. On a flat rock by the edge of the water, someone had placed my camping knife. The same one I'd left inside my tent pocket. It was clean, blade open, facing up. I picked it up and saw something scratched into the rock underneath it. Just a single word carved roughly with a knife tip. Stay. I didn't stick around after that. I threw the knife into the creek, ran back to my car, and got the hell out of there. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone until months later. What could I even say? Someone walked around my tent and left me a knife? They'd just shrug. Now, years later, I still think about it. Sometimes when I'm driving on long empty highways or stopping at rest areas late at night, I get that same feeling I had out there, that someone could be standing just beyond the light watching. I never went camping again after that. I sold my tent the next week. Every time I pass through Arkansas, I avoid that entire stretch of Highway 72. But I can still hear that soft dragging sound against the tent whenever I think about it. Like whoever was out there wasn't trying to hurt me, just letting me know I wasn't alone. And I understood the message clear as day. I didn't stay. It was early September 2019 when I decided to take my dog, Milo, on a weekend camping trip. I was 26 then, tired of city noise, screens, and late-night traffic. I wanted silence, the kind that sits heavy on your ears and makes you realize how loud life usually is. I picked a quiet spot about 2 hours from where I lived, near a lake in the northern part of Maine. The area wasn't popular, which was exactly what I wanted. Just me, my dog, a tent, and the woods. I left early that Friday morning. The drive was long but calm, the kind where you roll the windows down and let cold air rush through the car. Milo, my black Labrador, had his head out the window half the time, his ears flapping, tongue out. The sun was warm, the road nearly empty, and I felt free in a way I hadn't in months. By the time I got there, the afternoon light had started to thin out behind a layer of gray clouds. The air felt heavy, like rain was coming, but I didn't care. I parked my car near a narrow dirt path, grabbed my backpack, and walked about 15 minutes into the woods until I found a small clearing. The grass there was dry, the ground even, and there was enough room to set up my tent. The lake was only a short walk away, maybe 5 minutes through the trees. I could hear the faint lap of water against rocks even from where I stood. I set the tent up slowly, taking my time, and Milo sniffed around the area like he was inspecting every blade of grass. I laid down my sleeping bag, unpacked a small stove, and hung a flashlight from a branch nearby. Everything felt simple, easy. As evening came, the wind picked up. The smell of rain was close now, sharp and earthy. I decided to take Milo down to the lake before it got dark. The sky had turned the color of steel, the surface of the water flat and glassy. Milo trotted around near the edge, occasionally dipping his paws in and shaking them dry. The forest around us was quiet, too quiet maybe, but I told myself that's just what nature sounded like when you actually listened. When the first drops started falling, I packed up and headed back to the tent. By the time we got inside, the rain had turned steady. Not a storm, but a heavy, constant downpour. I set my lantern in the corner of the tent and lay down on my back, Milo curling up beside me. The sound of the rain on the nylon roof was oddly comforting. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, it was dark. The rain was still coming down, harder now, mixed with the occasional crack of thunder in the distance. Milo was awake, his ears perked, body stiff. He wasn't growling, but he was alert, the kind of alertness that meant something outside had his full attention. At first, I thought it was the sound of a branch breaking from the wind. Then another sound came, sharper this time, like something stepping on wet leaves just outside the tent. I froze. My hand instinctively went to the flashlight. I didn't turn it on yet. I just listened. The rain muffled everything, but I could tell the steps weren't random. They were slow, spaced apart, careful. Not the quick, darting sound of an animal. Not the shuffle of a raccoon or the soft padding of a deer. These were heavier, human-like. Milo stood up now, his body rigid, tail low. A low rumble came from his throat, the quiet kind of growl dogs make when they don't like what they smell. I whispered his name under my breath, even though I knew I wasn't supposed to talk. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The footsteps circled, once around the tent, slow, deliberate. The sound of breathing faint, but there. I could hear it between the raindrops, like someone exhaling through their nose just a few feet away. I stayed completely still, clutching the flashlight, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then the sound of fabric brushing came, someone's hand or maybe a sleeve, sliding against the outside of the tent. Just one slow drag along the side. Milo started barking, deep and violent, and I snapped on the flashlight instantly. The sudden light didn't reveal much, just the yellowish walls of the tent glowing from inside. Whoever was out there backed away fast, their steps heavy and retreating. I could hear them running off into the woods, breaking branches as they went. I sat there shaking for what felt like an hour, my flashlight clutched in my hand until my fingers started to ache. Milo wouldn't stop pacing, ears twitching, growling at random intervals. Eventually, the sounds outside faded. The rain slowed down too, turning into a light drizzle. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there in the dark, waiting for the sun to come up. When morning finally came, the forest looked normal again. Quiet, calm, almost peaceful. But the area around my tent told a different story. There were footprints in the mud, large ones, boot-shaped, pressed deep into the wet ground. They led from the tree line right up to my tent, circled it once, and then disappeared back into the woods. Whoever it was had been close, too close. I packed up quickly, tossing everything into my bag without bothering to fold or organize. I didn't even eat breakfast. Milo stayed glued to my side the entire time, still on edge, his nose twitching like he was catching scents I couldn't smell. As I hiked back to my car, I kept looking over my shoulder. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made my heart jump. The dirt trail felt longer than it had on the way in, like it stretched out just to keep me there longer. When I finally reached my car, the feeling didn't go away. My driver's side door was covered in muddy streaks, smeared handprints. They weren't mine. I stood there staring at them for a long time, trying to make sense of it. They were old enough to be fading, but new enough to still stand out against the silver paint. Someone had been there while I was in the woods. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I didn't look back once as I drove away. That night, back in my apartment, I took a long shower trying to wash the feeling off me, but it didn't help. I couldn't shake the image of those footprints, the sound of slow steps circling me in the dark, or the hand that had brushed against my tent. I told myself it could have been some hiker, maybe lost, maybe curious. But deep down, I knew how deliberate it had felt. How patient. Whoever it was didn't stumble on me by accident. They were watching. A few days later, I checked the local news out of curiosity. There was a small article about a missing camper reported in the same area that weekend. A man in his 30s. No foul play suspected yet, just under investigation. I didn't finish reading it. Since then, I haven't gone camping again. Milo still sleeps light, any sound at night, and he's up, alert, listening. Sometimes I wake up to him staring at the window, ears perked, eyes fixed on something outside that I can't see. I always tell myself it's nothing, just his instincts, just the city noise. But sometimes, when the rain starts tapping against the glass at night, that same chill from the woods creeps up on me again. The same thought I had when I sat in that tent with my flashlight trembling in my hand, that whoever was out there in the rain wasn't done watching. It was late October of 2019, and I had decided to go camping alone in the mountains of southern Colorado. I had been feeling burned out from work and wanted to get away from everything. No phone service, no people, just quiet and cold mountain air. I packed up my old Toyota Tacoma, loaded it with camping gear, a small cooler, and some simple food. I had camped plenty of times before, but this time I wanted to go somewhere more isolated, away from the marked sites. I wanted to sleep where it was just me and the forest. I left early in the morning, driving for hours until I turned off onto a dirt road that cut through thick pine trees. It was a narrow track, with grass growing in the middle and small rocks hitting the underside of my truck. The air got colder as I went higher up the mountain. After a while, I found a small clearing about 100 yards from a slow, shallow creek. There were no signs of anyone else having been there. No fire pits, no footprints, nothing. It looked perfect. I set up my tent near the edge of the trees where the ground was flat. The forest smelled strong, like pine needles and damp earth. The wind was light, but I could hear it moving through the tall trees, that soft, whistling sound that feels both peaceful and empty. By late afternoon, I had gathered some fallen branches and started a small fire. I cooked some canned beans and sausage, sitting on a folding chair, listening to the forest slowly go quiet as the sun sank behind the trees. When it got dark, it got really dark. The kind of darkness where the forest disappears into one endless black wall. I had only the fire and my flashlight. I remember how the flames flickered and made strange shapes against the trees. Every now and then, I'd hear something crack, a branch breaking somewhere deeper in the woods. That's normal, I told myself. Animals move around at night. Deer, raccoons, maybe a fox. I wasn't worried. Around midnight, I woke up. I hadn't slept long. I wasn't sure why I woke up at first, but something felt off. My tent was cold and quiet, and the fire outside had burned down to glowing embers. Then I heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps. Not heavy, but spaced out, steady. I froze completely. They weren't running or scurrying like animals. It sounded like someone walking in boots through the forest floor, stepping on leaves and twigs. The steps stopped, then started again, closer this time. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I didn't want to make a sound. The footsteps circled around my campsite, slow and quiet, crunching leaves, breaking twigs now and then. I could tell from the sound that whoever it was wasn't an animal. There was rhythm in the steps, a weight that matched a person. Then they stopped again right outside my tent. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I stared at the thin tent wall, expecting to see a shadow or a shape move across it. But nothing, just silence. I lay there, not sure what to do. I didn't want to unzip the tent. I didn't want to see who or what was standing there. After what felt like forever, the sound slowly faded, footsteps going off toward the trees again until there was nothing but wind. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept my knife in my hand under the sleeping bag, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. When the first light came through the trees, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. Everything looked normal. No tracks I could clearly see, just disturbed leaves. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a deer walking around, but I couldn't shake how deliberate those footsteps had sounded. I thought about packing up right then and leaving, but it was morning, and the forest didn't seem threatening in daylight. I made coffee, ate a granola bar, and tried to relax. Maybe it really was just nerves. I decided to stay one more night. The day went by quietly. I went for a short walk along the creek, watched birds, tried to enjoy the peace that I'd come here for. Still, there was this strange, heavy feeling that wouldn't go away. The woods felt different now. The silence seemed thicker. Every sound felt closer. By evening, clouds started rolling in from the west, and the temperature dropped fast. I built a bigger fire this time, trying to push the light farther out. I sat close to it, listening to the rain start tapping on the leaves. The forest started to fade into mist. When I crawled into my tent that night, it was raining harder. The wind picked up, shaking the branches above me. The sound of rain on the tent was steady and loud, so loud that smaller noises could easily get lost under it. I left my flashlight beside me, the knife next to it. It must have been around 2 or 3 a.m. when I woke up again. I couldn't hear the rain anymore. It had stopped completely, and everything was quiet. That's what woke me, the silence. When you're out in the woods, complete silence is never a good sign. Not at night. I listened. First, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard it again. The same slow crunch of footsteps on wet ground. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. They were coming from the direction of the creek. Closer and closer. My stomach dropped. I sat up slowly, gripping my knife. The steps stopped just a few feet from my tent. I heard breathing, not loud but clear. Someone was standing right outside. I could almost feel them there, like their presence pressed against the thin tent fabric. I stayed frozen again, barely able to breathe. Then the tent shifted slightly, like someone brushed a hand or shoulder against it. That was enough. I unzipped the tent fast, grabbed my flashlight, and shone it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness and rain-soaked air, but there was no one. Nothing moved. I swung the light in every direction, heart racing, but all I saw were the wet trees and mist hanging low over the ground. I left the flashlight on and started throwing my stuff into the truck. I didn't care about packing properly. I just wanted to get out. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped half the gear, didn't even bother to pick it up. I started the truck and turned onto the narrow dirt road, tires sliding in the mud. As I drove down the road, the headlights caught something on the right side, near the trees. For just a second, I saw a shape standing still. It wasn't close, but close enough that I could tell it was a man. Tall, wearing dark clothes, no light, no bag, no car anywhere near. Just standing there, facing the road. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I drove until I reached the main highway, shaking, staring straight ahead, not wanting to look in the rearview mirror. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told myself it could have been a hunter, maybe someone camping nearby, maybe just a coincidence. But the thing that still keeps me awake sometimes is how quiet he was. How he moved so slowly around my tent, twice, without saying anything, without making any sound except those careful, steady steps. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't some story to tell for fun. It was a real person, someone out there in the woods watching me while I slept, close enough to touch the tent. I never went camping alone again after that. I had been backpacking through France for 2 weeks when I decided to camp in a small forest near a village called Saint Sergues, close to the border with Switzerland. It was late September 2017, the air already colder than I expected for that time of year. I'd been sleeping mostly in cheap hostels and train stations, but I wanted one quiet night alone, away from people, away from the noise of cities and strangers. I bought some bread, cheese, and water from a local shop, then hiked a few miles into the forest until I found a flat spot near a stream. The trees were dense, tall pines and oaks that blocked most of the sky. It felt isolated, but not in a bad way, at least not at first. I set up my small one-person tent, the same one I'd been carrying since the start of my trip. The ground was damp, but I laid down my tarp and sleeping bag anyway. I remember sitting near the stream, eating my bread and cheese while the sun went down behind the hills. The light faded fast that evening, and soon the forest was swallowed in that kind of gray-blue dimness that comes before full darkness. The sound of the water moving over rocks was calming, and I tried to convince myself I'd finally get some real rest that night. Around 9 p.m., I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. The temperature dropped quickly. I had on 2 layers of clothes and still felt the chill seeping through the fabric. I listened to the forest for a while. Crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, branches creaking with the wind. It wasn't silent, but it was the kind of quiet that made every noise feel sharp and close. I turned off my flashlight and tried to sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. The first thing I noticed was the lack of sound. The crickets had stopped, and even the stream seemed quieter, like everything was holding its breath. My body felt tense before I even understood why. Then I heard a crunch, something stepping on leaves, maybe 20 or 30 feet away. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a boar, but the steps were slow, careful, too careful. Not the random movement of an animal, but someone trying not to make noise. I stayed still, breathing shallow through my nose, staring at the thin fabric of the tent. The moonlight gave the walls a faint glow, enough to see the outline of the trees outside. Then I saw it, a shadow moving between them. It was a person, tall, thin. The way they walked was strange, like they were slightly hunched over, moving with purpose but also with hesitation. I could hear the sound of the steps circling, slow and deliberate. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe properly. I just watched that faint shape move behind the thin tent wall. The person stopped for a few seconds. I could see the shadow standing still, facing my tent. I thought maybe it was someone from the village, maybe a farmer checking the woods. But then why in the middle of the night, in silence, out here where no one was supposed to be? I reached quietly for my flashlight, trying not to make a sound, but the small movement made the fabric of my sleeping bag rustle. The shadow reacted instantly. It turned toward the sound, and I froze again. For what felt like a full minute, neither of us moved. Then the steps came closer. One, then another. The crunching of dry leaves got louder. I could see the shadow stretching over the tent wall, then a dark shape near the entrance. The zipper moved slightly, not all the way, just a few inches, like someone testing it. I felt my stomach twist. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I waited. After a few seconds, the sound of the zipper stopped, and the shadow moved back. More footsteps, slow again, circling. Then silence. Total silence. I laid there, eyes open, staring at the top of the tent until they burned. I must have stayed like that for an hour, afraid to even shift my weight. Eventually, I heard steps again, but this time moving away. Leaves crunching softer, fading into the distance. I didn't sleep at all after that. I waited until the faint light of dawn started coming through the trees before I dared to unzip the tent. My hands were shaking when I pulled the flap open. The forest looked normal in daylight. Quiet, still, the same stream flowing nearby. But then I saw the footprints. They were fresh, deep, and long, circling around my tent in an uneven path. Whoever it was had walked around at least 3 times, judging by the overlapping tracks. I followed them a few meters away until they disappeared into thicker brush. I looked around carefully, checking for any signs of where they might have gone. There were none. It was like they just walked off into the forest. I packed my things fast, barely eating. Every sound made me jump. The daylight made me feel safer, but it didn't erase the memory of that shadow standing right outside. As I was taking down my tent, I noticed something else. Something I hadn't seen when I set up camp. About 20 feet from my spot, behind a fallen tree, there was a small pile of objects. Old cans, a half-burned blanket, empty bottles. It looked like someone had been living there, maybe for weeks. That realization made my chest tighten. The man hadn't just wandered through the woods by accident. He probably lived out there. Maybe he'd been watching me since I arrived, waiting until it got dark to see what I had. I thought about the way the zipper moved, how slow it was, like he was checking if I was asleep. Maybe he wanted to steal something, maybe worse. I didn't stop to think longer. I finished packing and started walking fast toward the direction I came from. The forest felt different in daylight, less peaceful, more like a maze I needed to escape from. I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone behind me, but the woods stayed empty. After about an hour, I reached the dirt road leading back to the village. When I finally saw houses in the distance, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I just got on the next train to Lyon that afternoon and booked a cheap hostel for the night. I remember lying on the bunk bed, surrounded by other travelers, and still hearing that faint sound of footsteps in my head. For the rest of my trip, I avoided camping altogether. I stuck to towns, hostels, crowded places. But even now, years later, whenever I think about that night, it isn't the footsteps that bother me the most. It's the silence after, the way everything in the forest had gone completely still, as if it knew someone was there before I did. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't made that small sound when I reached for my flashlight. Maybe he would have opened the zipper all the way. Maybe he would have taken something. Or maybe he was just standing there, watching, waiting for me to move. That's the part that stays with me. The thought that I wasn't just alone in that forest. Someone else had been there the whole time, watching from the dark, hidden just beyond the trees. And I'll never know who he was or what he wanted, or how long he had been standing there before I even noticed. Ever since that night in St. Serg's, I can't sleep properly in silence anymore. I need the sound of a fan, a TV, even traffic outside, something to fill the quiet. Because now I know what silence really sounds like when someone is out there, moving slowly through the dark, trying not to be heard. It was in late September of 2019 when I decided to go camping alone in northern Maine. I was 27 back then and had been obsessed with being outdoors. I had done several solo trips before, and I always liked the silence, the kind that made the world feel empty, like I was the last person on Earth. That weekend, I drove my old Subaru deep into the woods, down a dirt road barely wide enough for one car. The forecast said light rain, but I didn't think much of it. I just wanted to get away from the city, clear my head, and spend a few nights by the fire. By late afternoon, I found a spot off the side of an old logging trail near a stream. The air was damp and heavy, and the sky looked like wet cement. I set up my small tent under a cluster of pine trees that leaned slightly downhill. I laid out my sleeping bag, lit a small fire with the last bits of dry wood I could find, and cooked a can of chili on my camping stove. The forest was quiet except for the low hiss of wind pushing through the branches. It started to rain lightly just after sunset, a slow drizzle that made the fire sputter and hiss. I pulled my chair closer to the flames, wrapped my jacket tighter, and listened to the rain tapping on the leaves. The light faded completely around 8 p.m., and the woods turned into a dark mass. I could only see what the fire lit: a small circle of wet ground, some slick logs, and the side of my tent. Everything beyond that was pitch black. I remember feeling peaceful for a while, sitting there with my flashlight beside me, the smell of smoke in the air. But then I started noticing something: small sounds that didn't blend with the rain. It was faint at first, like a stick snapping, then a few seconds later, another one. I thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon moving around. It wasn't that unusual, but the sound didn't fade away like it normally would. It stayed steady, moving slowly, almost deliberately, around the edge of the trees. I turned off my flashlight to let my eyes adjust and listened harder. The rain had picked up a bit, tapping against my jacket, but under it, I could hear the dull crunch of wet leaves, footsteps. They weren't close, but they were steady and spaced, not the kind of uneven rustling animals make. I stared into the dark, trying to make out shapes. Every now and then, lightning flickered in the clouds above, giving short flashes of white light through the trees. Each flash showed only stillness, wet trunks, fog, and nothing else. After maybe 10 minutes, the noise stopped completely. I sat still, my heart beating faster than I wanted it to. The woods were dead quiet again except for the rain. I told myself it was just someone passing through the area, maybe a hunter or hiker caught in the storm. That thought didn't really make me feel better, but I forced myself to believe it. I threw more wood on the fire and decided to stay up a little longer. The rain grew heavier, running off the brim of my hat and soaking into the back of my neck. I finally crawled into my tent when the fire started dying out, leaving only a dim orange glow. Inside, the air was humid and smelled like wet nylon. I zipped the entrance shut and lay on my back listening to the rain drum harder on the tent fabric. At some point, I dozed off, but it couldn't have been for long. A sharp sound woke me, a hard, dull thud. I froze, holding my breath. It sounded like something heavy had hit the ground just outside my tent. Then, another noise, the crunch of gravel and wet leaves, right behind where my head was. Slow steps again, moving around the tent. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The steps stopped directly near the entrance. I could hear the soft sound of rain dripping off something, or someone, and hitting the ground. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The tent walls are thin, and when lightning flashed again, I could see the faint silhouette of legs. Not animal legs, human legs. They stood there, motionless, facing the tent. The sound of rain filled the silence between the thunder. After what felt like a full minute, the shape moved, turned slowly, and I heard the steps again, fading back into the trees. I lay still for a long time, trying to process what I just saw. It didn't make sense. There shouldn't have been anyone out there. The nearest town was about 20 miles away, and I hadn't seen another car the whole drive-in. I waited until the rain slowed down, maybe around 3 a.m., then unzipped the tent a few inches. The fire was out completely, just a pile of wet ash. My flashlight beam was weak, barely cutting through the mist, but I could see footprints in the mud. They weren't mine. They circled the tent twice before leading back into the woods. The prints were deep, whoever it was, they were heavy, wearing boots. I didn't sleep after that. I sat with my pocket knife in hand, listening for any sound until the sky started to lighten. The forest looked different in the morning. Calm, quiet, harmless. But when I stepped outside, the tracks were still there, clear and fresh in the wet dirt. They led off toward the tree-line, disappearing into the brush. I packed up everything as fast as I could. My clothes were damp, and my hands shook the whole time. The air smelled like wet earth and smoke. I threw my gear into the car and started down the muddy road. A few miles out, I noticed something else that made my stomach drop. On the side of the trail, near a bend where the trees grew tight, there was a small clearing I hadn't noticed before. Parked, there was an old, rusted truck, the kind that looked like it hadn't moved in years. The windows were fogged and cracked, and the bed was filled with trash bags, tools, and what looked like old camping gear. I slowed down, staring at it through the windshield. The tires were flat, but there were boot prints in the mud leading from the truck into the woods, the same kind of prints I saw by my tent. That's when I realized whoever was walking around my campsite hadn't just been passing through. They lived out there. Maybe they'd been watching from the start. I didn't stop to check. I drove until I hit the main road, then kept driving for hours, not even looking in the mirror. I didn't tell anyone for a long time because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding paranoid. But that night changed how I saw the woods. It's been 6 years now, and I still go camping sometimes, but never alone. I always stay near other people, and I never camp deep in the woods anymore. Every time it rains, though, and I hear that slow tapping sound on the tent fabric, my mind goes back to that night. The sound of steps moving in circles, the outline standing just a few feet away. Sometimes I think about that old truck sitting out there, maybe still there, half buried in mud and pine needles. I wonder if someone still lives around that spot, walking those same trails, watching from the trees whenever campers pull off the road. I stopped wondering who it was a long time ago. It doesn't matter now. All I know is that when it rains at night, I still wake up listening for footsteps.